You're listening to a free preview of exclusive content from Eric Draitser. For full access to exclusive interviews, podcasts, articles, videos, poetry, photography, and more, please consider becoming a supporter. For as little as $1 per month, you'll be a patron with access to all the content that you won't find anywhere else. For analysis from a radical perspective and with no financial backing from NGOs, nonprofits, corporate, or state-owned media, please visit www.patreon.com/Eric Draitser today. That's patreon.com/Eric Draitser. Thanks for your support. Welcome to Stop Imperialism Radio. My name's Eric Draitser. Thanks so much for coming back. If this is your first time finding this show, I'm so happy that you found the program and that you're giving us a listen, because what we're trying to do here is to build a really independent news analysis, political analysis platform from a left, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial perspective that is 100% independent of corporate media, independent of the NGOs, independent of the think tanks and the 501c3 tax-exempt organizations and foundations and all of those other institutionalized methods for controlling the alternative media. We're also, of course, 100% independent of all foreign media, foreign backing, and foreign investment. So what that means is that what you're getting here is truly 100% independent analysis from a radical perspective. That's what I want to bring, and that really is impossible without you guys, and I want to thank those people who are already patrons supporting this work. I couldn't give you a more heartfelt appreciation and thanks for doing that, and I want to give a special thanks to our latest subscriber, latest $5 subscriber. That's Michelle B. Michelle, thanks so much for becoming part of this project, and if you are hearing the free version and you want to become a subscriber and get access to the full podcasts as well as all of the other materials, go to patreon.com/Eric Draitser. $1 gets you access to the podcasts only. $5 and up gets you access to a bunch of other content that will be up there, including exclusive articles, audio commentaries, video commentaries, photography, poetry, a lot more that's going to go up there. I've been a little slow the last month because of some, let's say, upheaval going on in my personal world, but I'm back on track and going to be producing a lot more content, so, be looking out for that. Anyway, I want to turn to my guest today. I'm so happy to speak with him. He's, he's not only a very, very well-respected and very energetic and forceful activist and voice for anti-colonial, anti-imperialism, but he's also a comrade and a friend of mine. Sukant Chandan is on the show today. Sukant is the coordinator of the Malcolm X movement. He is a filmmaker, the author of The Martyrdom of Muammar Gaddafi, the films NATO's War on Libya, and Insight to Riot, among many other projects. I would certainly highly recommend you check out the blog Sons of Malcolm and follow Sukant's work. Sukant Chandan, welcome to Stop Imperialism Radio.
Great to be here, Eric. I'd just like to say that I was hoping that I'd get a nice little bit of cut on the cheese, but it seems that you're independent and unfunded. So there's no left corruption here for me to get, unfortunately. Very disappointed.
Very disappointing, because all it would take is just a little olive branch to some fascists on the right, and you should get yourself a nice fat paycheck.
Absolutely, bro. But on the real and seriously, I think it's I really respect you and value you as a comrade, and we're in a community of comrades who cannot be bought by anyone, which is really important. I really respect yourself and other comrades for being uncorruptible. We're in a very increasingly complex political terrain, which is it's difficult to navigate for consistent anti-racists and anti-imperialists. But I think it's really important, the work that we're doing. It's really important that you're developing your platform and your excellent work. And I'd really also like to just echo thanking those people who have subscribed to your Patreon account and accessing your information. It's really important that people do that for Eric and other like-minded comrades in our struggle. And I just really would encourage and really encourage the people out there who are listening, and to encourage their friends to give more support for this type of work that Eric and other people are doing. Without this kind of thing, I mean, Lenin used to say about Pravda, the newspaper, that that the working class struggle has to, for a working class struggle to have any self-respect, it needs to support its own media, and they had the newspapers at the time. And the parallel today is that it's these kind of platforms that we need to develop. So thank you, those people are contributing, and let's try and get a bigger community of people who are contributing to this type of political work.
Thank you so much for that, Sukant. And I would echo that sentiment about your work and encourage people
Thanks.
to find your work and to support it, because this is really, solidarity is it's a phrase we use. We talk about it a lot, but oftentimes we forget what that actually looks like and how that actually translates. None of us want to be talking about money and about subscriptions and about how much we're generating. Nobody wants to talk about any of that. We're all here for the political work, but there is a fundamental reality that we cannot ignore, and that reality is that we're up against the forces of capital and the forces of empire, and unless we're willing to mobilize what little support and little resources we do have, if we can't muster that minimum, then we're dead in the water.
Yep. Totally, bro.
Absolutely. So anyway, all right, let's turn to some very important topics, because, there's many different things that you and I can talk about. And in the second half of the conversation, we're going to shift gears radically and talk about something different. But right now, I would like to discuss Grenfell and what happened at Grenfell within the last month and a half or so, and some of the background. So there might be some people in the United States or elsewhere outside the UK who the word doesn't necessarily even conjure to mind what we're even really talking about. So before we can get into any of the details, give us just the overview of what happened at Grenfell, how it happened, and where we are now.
Sure, Eric. So my involvement in the community around Grenfell. Grenfell is one tower block. It has around just over 500 units. That's 500 flats or apartments, as you guys call them, in this tower block. The tower block is placed within a central borough of London, which is called, quote unquote, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. The north end of this borough, North Kensington, which Grenfell Tower is a historic migrant and working class community of African and Asians, particularly a high concentration of black people from the Caribbean, Moroccan people from North Africa, Irish people as well. In more recent decades, and people probably have seen this film, I don't like it, but it's the film Notting Hill, which is about that particular area. And the film Notting Hill is indicative of the process of gentrification that's been going on in Ladbroke Grove, and it's also called Notting Hill. Now, just the history of this area, Amy Ashford Garvey, who I think was the first wife of Marcus Garvey and a prolific revolutionary and grassroots activist, Amy Ashford Garvey, and Claudia Jones as well as many other leading revolutionaries, were active on the ground in North Kensington from the 1950s. In 1958, there was rioting in response to the killing of this black brother called Kelso Cochran, who was killed because he was having a relationship with a blonde white sister in the community. And after that, Claudia Jones formed the first carnival, or quote unquote Notting Hill Carnival, at St. Pancras Town Hall. And she used the proceeds of that carnival to defend the young brothers and sisters who were going through the court system, who were being criminalized because of the anti-racist riots after the death of Kelso Cochran. So this is a very politicized community. It's produced an amazing array of political personalities and radical cultural formations, primarily which is the Notting Hill Carnival, which is an expression of the black and migrant, particularly from the Caribbean heritage community. In the 60s, the kind of radical hippie movement, together with the Black Power movement, occupied a lot of private gardens because children were being run over and injured by traffic. So they kind of liberated these hitherto private gardens owned by rich people in the neighborhood. They squatted buildings, did black radical squat houses, radical hippie squat houses, And so out of this came, a lot of musical, cultural things from this struggle. So, like I said, in more recent years, it's been very gentrified. My personal involvement in this community is, I'm not lived that far in West London from Kensington, Chelsea. I live 5 miles away from it. I've been a project manager of youth work and youth-led projects and political conferences in that community since around 2007, 2008. Before, as a young person, obviously, I go there to the carnival and I go and hang out at Portobello Market, which is in that community. So what's happened, that's just to give you some historical and cultural background to the community. Now, I'm sure it's the same in the United States, as it's the same, similar situation throughout the quote-unquote West, is that migrant and working class people live in social housing, which they have complaints about their social housing to do with health and safety, damp, antisocial behavior, just the general conditions of their residence. And the Grenfell Residents Association have been complaining for many years about these issues. And this is a common story, throughout every working class community in this country. And of course, the authorities, the people responsible, the private landlord organizations, the local council, that's local government that's responsible for housing, national government that's responsible for housing, and all these other allied scam outfits and institutions, they all ignore, obviously, what's going on. Now, Grenfell Tower had this thing called cladding. It was literally clad in this flammable paneling. And the reason this paneling was put was wrapped, that Grenfell Tower was clad in this cladding, was to make it less ugly for the gentrifying communities that are moving into that immediate area. So it's an eyesore, they consider it, because they want to live in a plush, this kind of postmodern, weird, villagey type of world and take over our communities. So they were complaining, they were ignored, common story. And then tragically, what happened now 5.5 weeks ago on the 14th and 15th of June, it seemed that a fire started in the lower floors and then very quickly spread throughout the building. The fire service were on the scene within 6 minutes of being called, but didn't manage to control the fire. The fire raged across the building within minutes, and within 2 hours of the fire service arriving, the fire had spread right to the top of the building. So we're talking about some 20 plus story high building, and scores and scores and scores of men, women, and children were burnt alive. I'm sorry, I get emotional recounting it, because it was just the most horrific thing that migrant people have ever suffered in living memory in this country. I consider it a criminal attack on that community that's organized by local government and national government. This is state terrorism. It's not. No one said, okay, go and kill those people, but they were all set up institutionally to die. So that kind of brings me to the incident itself. So anyway, we can discuss further.
Yeah, and I want to get into some of the political context and what you just mentioned about, placing this in a historical trajectory. But I just want to nail down a couple of issues that have been bothering me since this happened, and I know obviously I'm not the only one. Number one is that I watched the news coverage of that. I watched the footage of it when it was happening and the immediate aftermath, and I've been following what the BBC and the Guardian and these other publications have been saying, and it just doesn't square with me. How is it possible, first of all, that we had this massive, tower block, or I guess in New York we would call it housing project? How is it that this massive building with 24 floors goes up in flames, is consumed by flames, and we see body bag after body bag after body bag, and yet now we have 80 dead? Is that even possible?
So this is a big controversy. This is one of the most emotive issues in the community as well. Sorry, Eric, you're going to say.
No, I just want to. Are we seeing a cover-up? Give us your analysis. Is there a cover-up of the death toll? How is that being done, and why is that being done?
Okay, so we all know we're going through a lot of political collapse, political crises, I think everyone can feel that stability is gone in society. So, in Britain that manifests in the United States, you have different crises going on. It's the symbol of the crisis is perhaps your new president, Trump. In Britain, we have Brexit, which is the kind of a pressure cooker for a lot of problems of exploitation and oppression. So I'm saying all these things because the ruling classes in the imperialist countries are increasingly losing the loyalty and the hegemony amongst their populations. And this is manifest in confused, contradictory ways. The conspiracy theory kind of industry and community is continued to rapidly mushroom because people just don't believe in the official line anymore from the government and from the media. So for the government, I think it's clear, and we have no direct evidence, but circumstantially, I think it was very clear that in the immediate aftermath of the massacre, they did not want the type of numbers that actually died to come out, because that would have been the kind of the not the quote unquote provocation or the kind of the lightning paper that would have sparked a real mass militant struggle amongst the people. Just during the tragedy, in the immediate aftermath, half the population of this country, if not more, had direct, open sympathy and support for justice for the survivors and the residents and the people in that community. So I think the government felt like, they just could not allow any type of large numbers of the fatalities and the death toll to come out, because they thought it would provoke and kind of facilitate and spark this type of uprising, frankly. And I think it probably would have. So then the survivors and the community got into a big fight with the media and the government over numbers, because in the first several days, they were talking very low numbers, that they, something, a couple of dozen, up to 30. And the residents were going out of their mind. I mean, these people are very deeply traumatized people. It's a very tight-knit community in North Kensington. You have to remember this. People, they really love each other. They really support each other. It's, it's a wonderful community atmosphere in North Kensington. It's an intergeneration community of struggle. There's not necessarily a great political struggle in recent years, but the legacy of those many generations of struggles has resulted in a very tight-knit community. So people know each other. People's children go to school with each other. They look out for each other. They help each other. So they know who lived in the tower block. So resident after resident, survivor after survivor says, look, don't treat us like idiots. We know all the families who lived in there, and we know nearly all of them are dead. So don't give us these figures of 30 or 40 or, maximum there'll be 80. And the bodies have been calcified because it was such an intense, long burn. There's actually hardly anything remaining of our loved ones. It's the bones and the teeth have been burnt. So DNA kind of recognition is impossible. And then there's, all of this is, the mistrust in the community is being fueled, and there's reports of bodies being taken secretly, immediately after the aftermath. There's so much controversy here, Eric, but it's all summed up with the fact that the people in the community have lost all trust, all confidence, and all faith in the media, in the government, and local and national governmental and state institutions.
Well, that makes sense to me. But what doesn't make sense to me is if this were here, let's say in New York City, okay, and we had one of the larger housing projects, let's say in East Harlem along the East River, of which there's dozens and dozens of them, right? Let's say the Thomas Jefferson houses on whatever that is, 110th Street. If that went up in flames, and the government came out and said, 40 people are dead, and we know, and people in that community know, that it's not 40 but 400.
Yeah.
This is something that we, meaning those of us who are interested in uncovering the truth, who live in that area, who work in these kinds of communities, who are interested in these type of issues, we could literally do the work to verify the numbers and to come out and demand, no, It's not 80, it's 800, and here's the evidence. We have statements from these families. We have, I could think of many different strategies that we on the grassroots side could use to address this issue. And so that's really leading to something you and I have talked about. What is happening to address some of these open questions, not only about what happened, but about where we go from here, from the grassroots side? Forget what 10 Downing Street is going to say. What are the people in the community saying, and what are the activists who work in that community doing?
So first of all, just to reply to you, just on the numbers issue about the martyred and the dead. Now, it became a big fight between the residents and their supporters and the government and the media, as I've explained. Now, you're right to say that obviously that these things need to be professionalized. The campaign needs to be professionalized, and we need to be able to advocate more strategically and with greater capacity. Now, it's been happening in a messy, disjointed way. But I'm just going to put that slightly on the side, the numbers issue, because I'll kind of explain why that is, and go to the bigger question that you're posing in terms of what's going on strategically. How does the land lay in terms of the grassroots campaign vis-a-vis local government and national government and state institutional bodies, and also the scam housing organizations and the local tenant management organization and all of this stuff. So now, I know a lot of people in that community because I worked there politically and professionally for many years. They're all very committed people. They're very, very dedicated community organizers and activists and advocates. So I've got all respect for their work they put in, the efforts, the tireless efforts, the many kind of sleepless nights, and they've been working through the night to rehouse people, advocate. It's been, there's a lot of love that's blossomed, and that's a beautiful thing. That being said, I've got some concerns over some lack of necessary response from the campaign locally. There's certain fundamental things that perhaps should have happened that haven't happened. And if they had happened, I think we would have been in a stronger position in terms of a struggle for justice for the martyrs and the survivors. And let me lay out what I think should have happened, and I'm really concerned about why it hasn't happened. One, that the activists and the supporters did not call a unity meeting. This has been the biggest attack on us. The vast majority of those killed in the fire were Black, African, and Muslim, and other migrants and other Asians and other people from the Middle East and a fewer white working class people. So why, we had the potential to make this not only a national campaign strategically, but a global campaign. Every single working class community that has a sizable migrant population supports Grenfell survivors and the martyrs' struggle across this country and globally. So a unity conference wasn't called. We have had no unity amongst Black and brown and radical grassroots activists. It just hasn't happened. And the only way to get a strategic approach to get justice is to expand the capacity of your grassroots support. And that just has not happened, which is a shame. Second, so first of all, why hasn't a unity meeting been called? To gather the maximum forces, to gather the historical advocates and activists and the current younger ones who want to work together and work out a federated support campaign for this struggle. It hasn't happened. Secondly, to centralize in terms of the media, set up support groups across the country and centralize the strategy and the reports from that. This is all possible. We're 5.5 weeks plus, and none of this has happened. And many organizers and activists and advocates are telling me privately that they think the struggle for justice for Grenfell is nearly eclipsed, or it has totally gone, and the boat has been missed.
Well, now the question is, and I want to interject, not because I know, not because there's not more to say on what you're getting at, but there's an elephant in the room here that really has to be addressed, and I admit that I even say this with some, reservations, but I'm going to say it anyway because it really needs to be said, and I'm going to say it very bluntly. Where the fuck is Jeremy Corbyn? Because what we see is that Corbyn who and I know your position on Corbyn, and I'll let you talk about that if you'd like. I'm maybe slightly more sympathetic to him than you are, but I think we're mostly on the same page. But the issue is, I see Corbyn out there with a massive platform, tens of millions of people, at his beck and call, as it were, politically, with penetration on every corporate and mainstream media platform, with coverage all over the place. And he uses that to talk about the attack on British workers from migrants and refugees and the European Union, thereby giving left justification for Brexit. But be that as it may, one would think that if he was equally committed to the defense of migrant communities, the defense of communities of color, and so forth, that he would say, while I've been kind of wishy-washy on Brexit and have been defending the rights of British workers, I will not be silent on this historic oppression of our migrant communities. And I haven't even seen that. So my question is, number one, where the fuck is Corbyn? And number two, where the fuck are all the people who support Corbyn?
Absolutely legitimate questions to raise, Eric, and really important conversations to be had. Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party. He's a parliamentary man. He's a reformist. So, he's going to do what benefits his narrow parliamentary agenda.
Sure.
Now, that's quite a asinine criticism from me, considering all the critiques.
But it's what we would expect. It's what we would expect. That I don't know that that's a scarlet letter for him necessarily.
No, sure, but the perception of Corbyn,
yes,
is that he's way beyond that. That's the perception, but he's not. He's he's the leader of the Labour Party. He needs to do what needs to be done in support of the Labour Party, of his particular UK nationalist, kind of pro-Brexit. I mean, he's given 3 parliamentary guarantees to the Tories now in Parliament for the Tories' hard Brexit. But the perception is that he's a grassroots man. The perception, he's like an activist. The perception is that he's radical. And this warped perception, this inaccurate perception and appraisal of Corbyn results in some disastrous things. So historically, since the Brexit victory last year on June the 24th, Corbyn has come out as someone who wants to trigger Article 50, which basically means that he wants a fast-track Brexit, which no one is advocating for, not even the Tories. The only people advocating for that is the far right. It's the people even to the right of the Tories. And the Tories have had to hegemonize the far right because they were losing some support to UKIP and other far right fascist forces. But on the Grenfell issue in particular for Corbyn, now Corbyn and McDonnell, who is the second in command in the Labour Party alongside Corbyn, their old comrades, they said rhetorically some things that were quite useful to some extent. McDonnell has called Grenfell social murder or political murder. So, okay, thanks. You're kind of raising the kind of political kind of rhetoric and political radicalism in language. Okay, that's not the worst thing to say. That's fine. They haven't done much. Okay. Corbyn, what's he said? He said that the Tories should, quote unquote, commandeer empty properties in Kensington and give them to the survivors' families. Again, not a bad suggestion. But there's 15,000 empty residential homes in the borough of Kensington and Chelsea. There's up to 50,000 commercial properties in total that are empty in that borough. It's the richest borough probably in all of Europe, right? It's the quote-unquote royal borough. So it has royal residences, official residences in that borough towards the south end of that borough. So the question is absolutely correct what you're raising, Eric. Why didn't Corbyn's followers take Corbyn's rhetorical lead and start occupying buildings? A lot of the social housing in that community and across this country and across actually the West has been predicated historically on the movement of squatters. Yeah, it's people who go into empty properties and demand that authorities hand over this empty property to people who are in very bad housing or no housing at all. This is the case, as I mentioned before in the earlier on in this interview, in Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill, that in the 60s people squatted parks and buildings and took them over. So why haven't people squatted? And this goes back to the left and the way it's been demobilized by Corbyn's Brexit posture. That kind of feeds in to demobilizing us over every other thing. Yeah. So it's not like the Labour Party is not complicit in the housing scam that's leading to disasters and deaths. They're complicit in local councils up and down the whole country. They're not any better about this at all. But again, the perception is that they are on, quote unquote, Corbyn and Labour is on our side, but we have no movement developing, and the activists on the ground, the anarchists, the radical people are not occupying buildings and handing them over to community organizations and activist organizations who are dealing with Grenfell. These kind of things need to be developed, and they just haven't, Eric, for the last 5.5 weeks. And,
now, why? Let's get into why. I mean, and there's a number of questions to ask. Is it a failure of leadership at the national level from Corbyn on down? I would say I think there's an obvious answer there. What about the leadership on the ground? Leadership within the grassroots, leadership within activist circles, whether they're political, like anarchists or communists or whatever, or whether it's more, ethnic-based, community-based type of organizations or what have you. I mean, there's a myriad of organizations that I would think should be the leading edge of a movement that Grenfell is in many ways sort of the powder keg for. And I don't see any of that.
I think we can't, and you've answered your question right at the beginning of your comment, which is, there's no point expecting anything from Corbyn and the Labour Party, that they're an institutional part of the British state. They're not designed to be activist based, and they never have, and they never will. And so they're not actually designed for us to achieve the objectives and justice for our community.
They would tail the social forces. If the social forces galvanized a movement, you think Corbyn and the rest of them wouldn't jump on the bandwagon? Of course they would. But
one can't underestimate, and I think most of the left has underestimated, and they haven't had a conversation because they've just been shut down, and they've just self-censored themselves in their loyalty to Corbyn. But I don't think we can underestimate how demobilizing Corbyn's loyalty to Brexit has been. What he's done is he's invisibilized the situation of migrants. I mean, particularly non-UK EU migrants could obviously not vote in this fascist referendum that decided on this Brexit nonsense. So you've demoralized, you've disorganized, and you've peripheralized and marginalized, and basically silenced a community of around 1 million migrants in that regard, and that has a knock-on effect on everyone else. Corbyn is against freedom of movement now, that we still have as members of the European Union. But he's moved away, and he's actually campaigned against freedom of movement. Now, if you campaign against freedom of movement and you've invisibilized 1 million migrants, that's going to have a knock-on effect on migrants of color. So African, Asian, Latin American diaspora here, they haven't been enthused. They haven't been brought into the leadership of Corbyn. Their issues in terms of migration have also been peripheralized and marginalized. And I have to be honest with you, Corbyn has developed a discourse of saying migrants are responsible for bad housing and bad pay and conditions in this country, right? He said that. I've had a direct face-to-face with him over this issue in mid-December last year, where I said, listen, you're not being seen to be standing with migrants. You didn't go to Eric Joswick's family when he was killed, a Polish guy in just out of London who was killed in a racist attack after Brexit. You haven't gone to this Muslim sister who lost her pregnancy. She was about to have twins. She was attacked in a racist attack and lost her pregnancy tragically and horrifically. You're not being seen to be standing with us. Every time we're attacked, you're not around, and instead you're talking about a quote unquote migrant impact fund to quote unquote waylay the negative impacts of mass migration into British working class communities. So don't underestimate the political demoralization of the Corbyn effect, although it's warped, because what you hear from people is Corbyn's our man, Corbyn's our savior, Corbyn's our only hope. So what you hear from people is this raised volume that we have a savior, but what's actually going on the ground is a lessening of strategic capacity of migrant struggle and radical migrant struggle towards socialism or anti-imperialism, or just the defense of migrants in the here and now. Then to answer the other section of your question, which is, well, what about the grassroots activists? Like I said, I have a lot of love and respect for these activists on the ground. They've been working hard. They continue to work very hard, and I think that should be given respect and appreciation. However, I think there's a number of problems we have here. First of all, I think that activists are not, and it's a community, and community have contradictions. There's contradictions amongst our people. Some people support the Tories and Brexit. Some people support Labour. Some people don't like any of these others, etc. However, I think while giving appreciation and love and respect to these organisers on the ground, I think they failed to make other organisers, veterans, people in the middle age, young people who live outside of the community in other parts of London and the country, I don't think people have been felt to be welcome there and to be involved and to be politically uniting with the people in that community. And that's part of the reason is the community is very precious about its own local community, but also the activists a little bit, as activists, we become a little bit territorial and a little bit protecting our little tiny turf of political activism. But we need to break out of that. We need to build bridges, because this is not about, me to be seen doing this or that. It's about the collective. It's about a social struggle. It's about a political struggle it should be about a growing collective. And we just haven't done that. And so you have lots of people who just don't know what to do. How do we get involved? How do we get politically organized? Who's inviting us? Well, no one's inviting us. So what can we do? So people have just stayed in their homes, like me, and we've been crying tears, every night, listening to the survivors on the news and on, different social media live videos and recorded videos. We're a defeated, depressed, traumatized community, man. I'm holding back the tears, talking about this, just talking about it with you. Every bloody day we have to see our neighbors cry their eyes out because their mum's bloody, turned into charcoal, or worse, or just dust in that tower. So where's the resistance? Where is it? Who's building the resistance? Where are all the veterans? Where are all the Black and Asian activists in their 60s and 70s? Why haven't they gone there? Why haven't they been organized there? Why is there no unity conferences? Why is there no support groups being set up? We could have set up support groups all across the world, like when people were campaigning to free Angela Davis, from prison. We could have organized like what happened with Katrina. There's a lot of parallels with Katrina, actually, in this regard. The community were complaining about the levee for years. They were ignored because who gives a shit about black working class people? And then the levee breaks and, our people are massacred. It's very similar parallels to here with Grenfell. But we have not developed the type of tsunami-like type of struggle which we potentially could have, which was well within our reach in the days and the first week or two after the tragedy. And the state knows this, Eric. The state knows this is exactly the most radicalizing thing that could actually unite migrant and their communities and their allies in this country and really go for justice strategically, not just for housing issue, but to break out of that and a real political struggle towards potentially a revolutionary struggle. The state knew that, and the state employed all of its agents, all of its media, all of its operatives, all of its tactics and strategies to ensure that nothing happened. Now, the state can do that. The state's done that in the occupied 6 counties since 1969. Derry's a tiny little, if you ever been to Derry, what the Brits call Londonderry, tiny little town. The Brits could not pacify it. It was a stronghold of the IRA and the Republican movement. All amount of oppression doesn't necessarily have to mean that the struggle is neutered and demobilized and sabotaged. But this seems to have happened. It's eclipsing, it's the slither of the potential of really developing a struggle remains, but that's fast closing. And it's just, it's just a very sad state of affairs.
Indeed. One of the things that I just want to note, and this is kind of to finish up that point about Corbyn, because I don't really want this to be, a discussion about Corbyn so much as it really is about Grenfell, but I think it's relevant. I was speaking not that long ago on my other podcast on Counterpunch Radio with our mutual friend Dan Glazebrook. And Dan made a great point, and I think it's germane to what we're talking about here. He said in response to one of my questions that, well, why is it that Corbyn made this shift to a sort of, appeal to right-wing or right-leaning conservative-type white workers and completely threw migrants under the bus. And Dan brought up a great point, and I think it's 100% relevant, and that is Corbyn suffered exactly 0 electoral consequences from that decision. Corbyn shored up the right-wing flank. He brought in a lot of those workers who had been voting for UKIP and for Nigel Farage and for Brexit. He brought them into the Labour fold while at the same time not really losing any of the support that he had from migrant communities and from others. In other words, it was from a purely, power politics perspective, it was genius what Corbyn was able to do. But from an ideological perspective, one has to then question just how genuine is Jeremy Corbyn when he talks about migrant communities, when he talks about refugees, when he talks about issues of imperialism, because he may have a track record against war, against Trident, against nuclear armaments and so forth, but his actual policy seems to say the opposite.
No, that's absolutely correct. I think it's, again, indicative of how much of a political dependency we as migrant communities have in this country. Again, I think sometimes it's difficult for us to appreciate. I think it's particularly even more difficult for white comrades in the West to appreciate how much of this political dependency is such a big problem for us, because you can't underestimate someone who's come from another country that English is not their first language. First of all, that politically really, if white European people, Western people have ever gone to a non-English speaking country and have to really rely and not, lean on their massive privilege, but to kind of just be a little bit stripped of one of the most powerful tools of social existence, which is the ability to talk in a language with other people. If you don't have that, it really creates an inferiority complex. And I've found that when I lived in Brussels, when I couldn't converse because I don't know French or Dutch. So I couldn't speak to hardly anyone. Luckily, a lot of Belgians speak English, so it wasn't so bad. But you can't underestimate how much people feel inadequate and lack of confidence in regards to that. And then look at this. Look how sad it is that Corbyn, as you say, hasn't got migrants' backs. But so many migrants who, migrant organizations, overwhelming sections of the migrant community here are against Brexit. But the migrant support for Corbyn is there. And the African Asian organizers who are supporting Corbyn are silent in terms of even a constructive critique. I'm saying to them, don't even attack Corbyn, but hold him to account. When I had the face-to-face conversation with Corbyn, I didn't abuse him, but I was robust and I was principled. And I made it very clear to Corbyn that, look, you're failing us on this and you should not be seen to be failing us. It's wrong. And he was totally ashamed of himself and probably wanted to run away as soon as possible from the conversation. But hold these people to account. Now, that's Corbyn and the problematics of that and the problematics of political dependency and inferiority complexes in terms of migrant communities and white society and political leadership. But the other thing, which I just don't understand, is that Black activists, by that I mean non-white activists, and radical activists talk about Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, Claudia Jones, Che Guevara, Chavez, Kwame Nkrumah. We talk about these figures all the time, but we never actually apply the first basic lessons that they keep telling us. Absolutely. Which is you organize politically independently. You do not rely on any other middle class or mainstream political force. And that's the whole concept of Black power, which, revolutionary socialists and anti-imperialists have a very similar concept, that you organize independently oppressed people. And it's only with that growing power of the organized and a politically correct leadership of that community that you can attain any reforms and any struggle going forward. In the concrete context of Brexit, Corbyn and Grenfell, the basic Black power politics, the basic community radical grassroots politics is absent. It's not really there. It's not really applied. It might have some bit of superficial rhetorical kind of mention, but it's not applied as a strategy. So post Grenfell, within a week or two, you had leading organizers on the ground who position themselves as black radical, etc., and pro-black liberation, thanking the police and the fire service, right? It doesn't make any sense. Post Katrina, you don't thank the fire service and the emergency services. You hold them to account because they failed us. And then when you try to address this publicly on social media, I did raise concerns about why we're thanking the police, and then the said activist responds that we have to thank the police for ensuring social peace, and there's been no rioting since Grenfell. So we're thanking the police for stopping us getting angry and militant. I'm not pro-riot, and it's very clear in my work in terms of my documentary and my advocacy around August 2011 about the incidents that happened here. I'm not narrowly pro-riot at all, and I've actually been arguing against rioting post Grenfell. But I am encouraging, and I've unfortunately been the only person to encourage a slogan and a strategy of justice now by any means necessary. What that looks like, we should do cleverly, we should do intelligently. But we just haven't had that capacity building. And it goes back to this whole thing of political dependency on political forces who are not vested in justice towards us and our communities. Instead, they're vested in a totally different project that's to do with other social groups in our society, nothing to do with us. It actually pushes against our struggle. So these are the challenges that we're faced with. And my concern is, Eric, we've got increasing amounts of young people who are becoming radicalized in this country. The militancy has rocketed since Grenfell here. The militant conversations taking place in working class migrant households and kitchens. I mean, the stuff that people are saying, they're ready. But who's going to organize them? I see these young rappers, who into trap and different new genres of their musical expressions. They're referencing Dr. King, Malcolm X, Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi's become a folk hero for a lot of black and brown migrant youth. They have images of them, their music videos. They're ready for a militant struggle. They're obviously very primitive in their approach politically, very inexperienced and naive. Where are the people who are going to organize these people? Where are the people opening the door politically to these people, to guide them, to encourage them, to organize them? Eric, we have nothing, brother. We have nothing here.
Well, then the final question then on that before we go to break and shift gears is, so if there's nothing, if there's no real leadership, if there's no real organizational capacity building or anything like that, then where do we go from here? I mean, obviously, 5.5 weeks have passed. Obviously, there's a feeling like the window is closing. But from the sense that I get from talking to you and from following this story on my own is that while the window feels like it is closing, it isn't yet closed. And so the question is, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? What is your analysis of steps that need to be taken concretely now and in the near term and medium term?
Yeah, so all very, very important questions and challenges that you're raising, Eric. I think so. I would answer it in two ways. One way is what should happen, what I'd like to see happen, what I think the situation requires. And the second response is a very just realpolitik, very realistic, very grounded type of answer. So the first one is what should happen. What should happen is that the culture of 30 years of political corruption, of being funded by state or semi-state bodies, of the veteran activists of the 60s and 70s, that culture of corruption has to be fought against and overcome. And people have to go back to the grassroots and start building bridges and building grassroots, non-funded, non-state or semi-state funded circles and networks and organizations. We need to form new organizations the older activists, my generation, younger and older, need to form new organizations to organize new young people. They're not all going to join the Malcolm X movement, to which I belong, and they don't all come to our events. We live in a city of up to 10 million people here in London. We need everyone to take initiatives, effective initiatives. Thirdly, it's just a strategic issue of gathering forces, as Mao said, and as Corbyn's quoted Shelley, which is a very similar quote: "Unite the many against the few." And that's what's not happening. But it desperately requires that. But I think we're just not going to get that, Eric, because the atomization, the demobilization, the political sectarianism, the personal corruption, the financial corruption, the sexual corruption that exists in our leftist political and radical political communities. It's too embedded. It's too just fossilized right now and solidified for it to shift. Now, the other way I'm going to answer it is a more realistic way. Now, we are seeing the pressure build everywhere around the world. It's really clear that the world is going into deeper crisis, it's going to deeper conflicts as a result of the global capitalist colonial crises that's going on. So yes, Grenfell, we don't know, looks like it's not going to go too far. It may be, a 30, 40 year wait like Hillsborough inquiry and the Bloody Sunday inquiry, where we get hardly any justice anyway at the end of that process. But people are still continuing to lose support for the system. They're seeking answers elsewhere. It's a whole bunch of mess in terms of the alternatives they're finding. It's a mishmash of fascism and Gaddafi and Malcolm X and what's his name? Even Jay-Z. It's just a mishmash of confusion. But that's developing, and we've got to fight harder. And through all of this hell, Eric, this increasing hell. I mean, it's hardly hell here in the West. Look at Yemen and Syria, and Libya and Nigeria and Afghanistan and Pakistan and other places. But relatively, things are still worsening here. People are becoming radicalized. There's indications all the time. The danger is, Eric, that people are continuing to get angry, and the anger will manifest in another riot. Now, the young people, there was a brother called Edson who was killed some months ago by police in East London. His crew came out and other friends came out to support him. They had they had mini skirmishes with the police. 6 police got injured in one protest. It was next to Westfield in East London, which is one of the biggest shopping centres in this country, in Europe. They had to close the shopping centre down. But the youth there who were they were throwing bricks and stuff at the police and burning bins as roadblocks. They explicitly referenced that they do not want to do the tactics that people did in August 2011 in the uprising that took place in England at that period, that they want to be more strategic. So it's in the minds of young people that August 2011 just didn't work, because it didn't, because 5,000 people went to jail. There was no support campaigns or justice campaigns. And people just suffered, and it just stuffed more people into criminalization. So young people are slowly thinking about these things, reflecting on these things, but they have no flipping leadership. And this is really, it's a mark of dishonor and shame on all of us, including myself, very much including myself and my closest comrades, but others in the general political community. That why are we being hostage to our own petty egos and not saying, listen, I don't even have to work with you, but let's just agree that this is what we're going to do in coordination. This federation of organizations and communities for Grenfell. I'm saying, people don't even have to speak to each other, they have to work together. Just go back to your own respective localities and work hard and feed in and report to a central media platforms. That's all we have to do, if you really can't stand each other. But we're just not doing any of this, Eric. So the hope is that new generation of revolutionaries come through. But just to finish off, the last 10, 15 years, I've been dedicated to this nearly full time for 25 years, since I was 14, 15 years old, Eric. The last 10, 15 years, I can tell you, I've literally only seen 2 or 3 really courageous, fearless, brave, brilliant young revolutionaries in their early 20s come through. And I can tell you, that small, tiny, minuscule group of people who actually made, in some cases, a little bit of ripples and good impact on our struggle, they're demoralized, they're depressed, they're isolated, and some have given up, and some are on the verge of giving up. This is the state in which we are, that even the most brilliant young revolutionaries with all their faults, some of them treated me a bit shitty, but I don't care. They're my young comrades, my young brothers and sisters. They don't feel after even a year or 2 that they want to continue doing anything. So what does that say? What does that say about us? And it's just very frustrating how little people want to have these critical, strategic discussions. But me and others and the comrades in my organization, our allied organizations and individuals here, we're committed to this, and we're not going to give up. We're definitely not going to give up, defending our homelands in the global south against imperialist attack. And we're not going to give up defending our diaspora communities here, because they're our people. And what can we do but continue to struggle for them?
Oh, that's very well said. Okay, so on the other side of the break, I want to talk about an issue that really brought you and I together, and I think kind of was the issue that really bonded us initially, and that's Libya and the situation in Libya and some of the work that you're doing about Libya and the political content of the Libyan resistance, which is very, very important. If you're interested in the legacy of Muammar Gaddafi, if you're interested in what the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya was really about, what Libyan socialism was about, if you're interested in what the future of Libya might look like if things go the way they maybe kind of sort of need to go, well, then you would hope to be listening to the second part of this conversation. If you're not yet a patron, please do visit patreon.com/Eric Draitser. Become a patron there, and you'll have access to the full podcast, including my conversation with Sukant Chandan about Libya when we come right back. So stick with us on the other side of the break, and we'll continue.
Eric, if I could just feed into that as well, it's not just about Libya and the kind of what's going to happen with Libya in the future, because the future of Libya is the future of North Africa, it's the future of the Middle East, it's the future of African liberation, and actually it's the future for black and brown and working class liberation globally as well.
I totally agree, and you've completely stolen my intro to the second half of this conversation.
Sorry,
so I'm going to thank you for that, and listeners, we'll be right back. This has been a free preview of exclusive content from Eric Draitser. For full access to all content, please visit www.patreon.com/Eric Draitser to become a patron today.